Hi everyone, it's your boy Zach, and this is my video about what's wrong with the Sean Connery James Bond movies. So I've got to be careful that this doesn't turn into what's wrong with all of the James Bond movies. I made a plan to watch all of the James Bond movies. That's the 25 Eon movies. That's, most people consider that the regular movies. Then there's Never Say Never Again. I did not watch Casino Royale with David Niven. No, it's not going to happen. So I just finished, and you might say, wait, you just finished the 25 or 26 James Bond movies, but you're just talking about the Sean Connery? Well, I just finished the Sean Connery. I started with them, then I kind of didn't like him that much, so I started bebopping around the timeline. And so I just watched You Only Live Twice today. Actually knocked it all out in like 24 hours, which is pretty fast for me. And I like that one a lot. So as mentioned in previous videos, I never really liked James Bond growing up. I grew up in the Roger Moore era where he was considered to be a clown. And I saw, License to Kill in the theaters after, hearing so much about James Bond. And it was just freaking miserable. So I never saw any of the I don't think I saw any of the Sean Connery movies all the way through. They'd show them on cable here and there. But, yeah, until, like, the last month or so. And, I'm not really crazy about him. So, one of the things about James Bond is it's so much in the zeitgeist. Something like, Game of Thrones, but much larger. In that you can never see James Bond and yet know a lot about it and also feel like you know even more. And I realized that from all of the pop culture references and Simpsons and all that type of stuff, I had formed in my head what like the average James Bond movie was, and I would say You Only Live Twice is that exactly. It's got a villain lair in a hollowed out volcano. It's got lots of commando stuff. It's got stunts. It's got gimmicks. It's got gadgets. It's got crazy vehicles. It's got beautiful women speaking phonetically, all the things that people think they know about when they think they know James Bond. Sean Connery obviously being the first movie James Bond, although supposedly there was like an American James Bond, and okay, we're not talking about that stuff. We're not talking about Austin Powers or Matt Helm or Man from U.N.C.L.E. We're talking about what people think about when you say James Bond movies. So the problem I have with the Sean Connery era, which I'm not really crazy about, I can take it or leave it. There's good parts, there's bad parts. There's a lot of... I read this series called Modesty Blaze. It was basically trying to glom on of the popularity of James Bond in the 60s. And so I got used to the pacing of novels. Novels have a lot of we're going from here to there, but we're going to be on a ship for a week, so... then, things are just going to slow down. Nowadays, movies are like, here. Whereas back then, there was a lot of, logistical, basically, travelogue stuff. But my issues with the Sean Connery movies are my issues with the entire James Bond franchise. In that, except for things like, let's say, No Time to Die, there is no consistency. I'm not just talking about between different actors, between different eras, between different movies. I'm talking about within the same scene in the same movie, there will be varying levels of quality, acting style, and it feels like a mess. I would say the thing I like most about the Daniel Craig era, I keep veering into the whole thing. Okay, let's stay on Sean Connery. So Sean Connery being the first, he had no idea what to expect. It's like that joke about, what's the first thing that Adam said to Eve? Stand back, I don't know how big this thing is going to get. Well, Sean Connery did not know how big this thing was going to get. He was a young actor. Whenever you see him in a movie, whatever age you think he is in the James Bond movie, subtract 10 years to find out his actual age. He looks about 40 in the first one, he's 30. By his last one, he's 40 and he looks 64-ish. Actually, no, his last of the Eon Bonds. Then he comes back 12 years later and he looks younger than he did in 1971. It's weird. But there's a feeling that, back in the day when you would say like, oh, did you know Clint Eastwood started on a cowboy show? It's like everyone from that era did. And nobody liked that first thing they became famous for. Clint Eastwood, he became, the Man with No Name, and later Dirty Harry. He started on, I forget which cowboy show he was on, but it was always like, get a gig, get a recurring role, get notice, and oh shit, I signed a terrible deal. Get me the hell out of this so I can actually get a good deal. So it literally feels like James Bond to him is like that shitty cowboy movie that every star from like the 60s through 80s they started with. By the end, it wasn't like cowboy TV shows. It was like detective TV shows. But you understand what I'm saying. Like, they wanted to be more than that. So, while I wouldn't consider Connery to be a, snooty actor, you did get the feeling that he wasn't really crazy about this, although his performance varies wildly from movie to movie. And I thought about it a lot. Now, actors from the UK, that whole area, they if you always wonder why like they'll win an Oscar and then they'll be in like some shitty Jaws movie, in that part of the world, when you're starting as an actor, you're expected to do everything. You take every job there is because you don't know when it's all going to stop. And they kind of get that into their head that they've got to like obsessively work until literally in their 80s. But you're also not supposed to be like above the work or look down upon it. But I wouldn't say he looked down upon it. I would just say it was like something he got over very quickly. And then he had to keep doing it for 20 years when he was probably really into it. Maybe the first 2 years. The feeling that he doesn't really like it that much, or even worse, he's just indifferent to the role, that's it feels weird to me. I want to know the actor portraying a character likes that character or has special insight to the character, and they're not just like, oh geez, this is this freaking, I signed a 7-picture deal because I was 29, I wasn't thinking, I thought it would do okay, and now I'm stuck in this till I'm 40. So there's that aspect. I liked bits and pieces of all of them. I don't think there's one that I just, except for You Only Live Twice, which still has like weird parts to it. There's parts where it's like, okay, let's get to the final battle, and they're like, no, you've got to pretend to be Japanese and get a fake wife in a village. Like, what the hell's going on? I think a lot of this is that this is still back in the day where movie theaters would advertise that they are in color and have air conditioning. So it was still like, oh, we're going to shoot in Tahiti. We're going to shoot in the Bahamas. We're going to shoot in Japan. So, like, that was the special effect. The special effect was, like, going to Japan. So a lot of times when things seem kind of boring, you're like, well, this was really exciting in 1963 or 4. There's also a weird thing, and I had to talk to a friend of mine, because the villains, you always hear about the Bond villain, what an amazing villain a Bond villain is. And then you just get like Goldfinger cheating at freaking like card games and golf. And I had to talk to a friend. I was like, he's a huge fan of the Bond franchise. And I was like, what is this? I spent 20 minutes watching this fat guy cheat at golf. And he basically said, nobody can identify with, robbing an army base or taking over the world. But you have the guy cheat at golf, and you're like, that guy's evil. The funny thing is, at one point he gassed like an entire, like all of Fort Knox. Everyone was supposed to be dead. But you're like, I knew he was evil when he cheated at cards at that resort. There's also a lot of just going to resorts, which might be kind of confusing to you if you're not 100 years old. But back in the day, there was a depression. No, there was a world war, there was a depression, and there was another world war. So people were just poor, or they died, or they had polio. So things like going on a vacation was crazy. So that's why there's all these scenes of like James Bond just checking into hotels, walking into his hotel room, looking around, because that was like Fast and the Furious, putting a car into space type of shit. The average person back then, you would go on like your freaking, vacation would every other year you would put your whole family in a station wagon and drive to the Outer Banks. You know what I mean? Like, you didn't go to the Bahamas. You didn't go to freaking ski in Europe. You did really basic shit, which was usually a car drive within a couple hours of your house. And then you'd stay like, you know, like, it's kind of hard to describe if you're young, but middle class back when I was a kid would be considered poor. Like, just everything was run down. Like, I just remember the hotels that were like the vacation hotels. They were horrifying, absolutely horrifying. So a lot of the appeal of it is non-existent. You literally had to grow up in the 1920s through the 1940s, survive a world war and frickin' polio, and then all of a sudden, you know, 30-year-old Sean Connery with a wig on who looks 50, checking into hotels. If you could do a compilation of all of the checking in and out of hotels, calling room service, waiting for room service, like, there's just a lot of like freaking Expedia.com type of shit in the Sean Connery era. One thing I liked is, you know, just coming from watching No Time to Die, and at one point it's freaking Bond with like a submachine gun and a pistol, and he's John Wick. He's a ninja. He takes out like 50 henchmen by himself. And then you watch the earlier ones, and there'll be an entire 30-minute sequence. They're like, okay, James Bond is on a train. There's an enemy agent who's an inch taller than him and 5 years younger than him. How is he gonna? And he has to go through some stuff. Here's another thing Sean Connery, James Bond does. He begs for his life a lot. He just says, like, I'll just work for you. Don't kill me. You know that scene you've seen a million times where he's like, do you expect me to talk? No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die. They never show how he escapes. You know how he escapes? He's just basically like, I'll just work for you. Yeah, fine. We'll go kill everyone in Fort Knox. A lot of times he gets out, it's random, happenstance, stupid shit. There are some fun stunts. There's some. One of the things that's really surprising when you go back and watch the older, you know, James Bond movies is you realize he's basically a naval superhero. In the later movies, he's barely ever referred to by his military rank. When he's in uniform, I think Pierce Brosnan did it once. Daniel Craig did it 0 times. It almost like you're like, wait, is this like a cover story? It's like Commander Bond. It's like, oh no, he's actually a naval officer. But there's so much stuff having to do with him being in the Navy, Moneypenny in her uniform, and one of them, M's in his uniform. Like, everything revolves around being near the water. And then later, he also skis. But, like, he's basically a scuba diving and skiing superhero. More than, you know, a spy, and definitely not like John Wick or anything like that. So, then we're going to talk about, oh my gosh, Diamonds Are Forever. So he did, like 4 or 5 movies, and then he finished. They had George Lazenby. That didn't work out. So he came back. He made a lot of money to come back. He made like $1.5 million in 1971, plus part of the profits, to come back one more time to play Bond. He is 40 years old. He looks like he's in his 60s. It is the worst James Bond movie ever. It is so cheap, but I think generally, I forgot to explain why his performance varies wildly. I think it has to do with, you know, whatever affair he was having at the time, however his marriage was going, and more likely, like, what were his accommodations? I seriously think, like, he's like, yeah, I just want to go to Vegas for 3 months, gamble, get me a nice freaking room, comp me. And so, like, Diamonds Are Forever is fucking awful. And he seems to be having a grand old time. You Only Live Twice is actually pretty darn good. And I'm just going to chalk it up to he really just enjoyed being in Japan. Again, with the consistency, like, sometimes James Bond is kind of weak and dopey. Sometimes he's fairly tough. He's also very inconsistent on his license to kill. At one point, it's just these dock workers, and he just starts freaking taking them off the census. It's like, that guy has a pipe in his hand, and it's not even a large pipe, and you just freaking murked him in broad daylight. There's some really dumb gadgets. There's some cool ones. He has this auto gyro or some shit at one point in. I know I'm saying it's all the Sean Connery movies, and I'm mainly just talking about the one I just saw this afternoon. But the earlier ones are fairly low stakes. I've heard they're a lot more like the novel. It's a lot of let's play a card game and try to get some information on these retired British guys and find out, ooh, there's a radio. Somebody broke the radio. It's real simple type of stuff. But overall, I mean, I love the Roger Moore era. I mean, you skip the first one, and then you just go from the second one, and that's a fun era. But if I had to recommend them, I mean, the second one was actually pretty good. I forget that one. That one was rather simple, and the second one was pretty good. The first one's very perfunctory. Goldfinger is pretty good. Fourth one, Thunderball, I didn't like that one at all. The fifth one was actually really cool. And then when he comes back for his sixth, oh, I forgot about Never Say Never Again. So, due to some rights issues because of the novel publishing, the rights to Thunderball were actually owned by someone else. So he got to make his own version of Thunderball, and it was completely legal. So in 1983 or something like that, Sean Connery came back, and he was in his early 50s. He looked like in his early 60s, and it was him, Kim Basinger, and they made Never Say Never Again, and that movie is freaking awesome. It's one of the best James Bond movies. It's not made by Eon, which is the Broccoli's. You always see that person's name, Cubby Broccoli, and then I think it's his daughter right now, Barbara. But it was actually kind of privately financed. When you read about it, it was basically people who hadn't made a lot of movies, so they kind of didn't know what they were doing. So they just hired really good people. Like, it's Irving Kershner, the director of Empire Strikes Back, and it's just freaking awesome. I would put that out of all the Sean Connery movies. I mean, I would put You Only Live Twice, because that's just like the quintessence. Like, if you watch Austin Powers, 90% of the stuff they parody is from one movie. So yeah, that's a really good. And that's like, I would call that classic Bond. So I would definitely say that You Only Live Twice is the best Sean Connery Bond. Then I would say Never Say Never Again. I would completely avoid Diamonds Are Forever. You can skip Thunderball. I'm blanking on it's not The Spy Who Loved Me. It's something. It has a name like that. I forget. For the second one. Second one's actually pretty darn good. Like, really good. Goldfinger, I know people quote it all the time. It's okay. it's okay. But definitely check out You Only Live Twice and Never Say Never Again. So tomorrow I'm going to do a video on the entire franchise, and pretty excited about that. Thanks for watching. Bye.